Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties, episode 27 of season 4. My name is Lee. I'm in Western Australia. This week I'm joined by Zeev in Melbourne.
Guten Tag.
And Vikas in... I was about to say Germany. I don't know why I was going to say Germany. Vikas in Canberra.
I feel like I should report from Germany once.
That would be interesting.
Maybe next time.
Yeah. I'm sure you can get there. You do enough travel. It's not totally out of the realms of possibility for you to do it.
It's not, but also next week is Oktoberfest. So, I mean, would be very... it would be good timing.
Yeah. So, go. Oh, anyway, this week we're going to talk about the plebiscite. The High Court has ruled on its constitutionality, so that's been a big thing in the news. And we're also going to talk about New South Wales communists, Liberals, renationalising power plants, because that's a thing. So let's start off with the High Court. So on yesterday at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the High Court ruled on whether it was constitutional for the postal survey, marriage survey, to be going out. There was questions of constitution.
I think you meant Friday.
Was it Friday?
It's Friday.
Oh, I thought it was Monday for some reason. Okay, it was on Friday. Things have been a blur. Hang on, today's Monday. I'm really out of it.
It was the last business day.
It was the last business day, so yeah. Weekend was just like whatever. Okay, anyway, it was Friday. And they were ruling on the constitutionality. There was questions about whether the government had the authority to essentially appropriate money that was previously sort of appropriated for a purpose to then reappropriate it for this survey, looking at, say, the precedent that was given under the Chaplin's case. And so, yeah, but it came... we haven't got their full ruling yet, so the exact reasoning has not yet been revealed, but... in all of its detail, Vikas, I see you're frowning. You don't need to frown. I know you... Why don't you give the reasoning that you're aware of?
Sorry, no. I'm frowning at something else. But
okay. I thought you were frowning at me.
Okay. I heard on the... I heard... Basically, the reasoning I've heard is basically... I've heard quotes in various news articles. And I think the general thrust of it was the High Court basically said this was an existing power of the cabinet. So I made the comment, and this is based off an online article. An online piece that was written by someone who calls themselves a constitutional conservative, who was going, well, I think this is kind of disturbing because it basically it okays the ability of the executive, effectively cabinet, to make any sort of emergency spending decision to effectively resolve any internal party dispute, and like effectively it's a blank check for any executive. So like the next time the Labor gets in and they're having some trouble resolving something, they could just say, "Hey, we're going to now poll the public, or we're going to make some emergency funding available for this particular thing, just to solve this little issue," and it doesn't go through Parliament. And Parliament's meant to be like the oversight for all spending. So, like, it's widened the definition of this emergency spending power.
I mean, the politicians generating a crisis is like the easiest thing in the world. So, I mean, this is something you see in US politics with any sort of debt ceiling or budget negotiations. They don't do anything about it for like they've got literally years to sort it out. And every year it gets pushed off until it's like, oh, in 2 days we're going to run out of money. We need to come up with a solution right now, and all talk of, it's just continue the spending, because, well, they don't want to deal with it. And so having a crisis gives them sort of an easy way of getting out of any sort of responsible behavior. So, yeah, I mean, it's not hard for governments to generate the sorts of emergency situations that they'd want to use this sort of power for.
Yeah.
So I mean, with that being said, it can generate a lot of political embarrassment for governments to have it go this far, so to speak. Now, I'm not... Obviously, there's an incentive for governments to bypass Parliament, which is why they would want to create an urgent or unforeseen circumstance, but at least using that power for now might generate a bit of political embarrassment for the government of the day. It is generating a bit of political embarrassment, basically from a very small group of self-described fiscal conservatives who look at the decision and are worried that the government will have more power to spend other people's money. But let's face it, we're about, I don't know, 5% of the country.
Yep.
Everyone else doesn't seem to care or mind.
Well, the interesting thing is I think this is where you can sort of divide the conservative community between. So there's a bunch of people who call themselves constitutional conservatives, who basically go like, look, there's this wonderful thing called the Constitution, which, I mean, I'm skeptical about the wonderfulness of our Constitution because there's a lot of stuff in there that I would change.
Yep.
That's not to say I'm not going to follow it, but I would rather change it. And
especially compared to the US, where you can extol the virtues of at least some point in time where maybe they might have had a lot of freedom. The Australian Constitution doesn't seem so crash-hot. It seems like a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of just freedom for the executive to basically do whatever the hell they like all the time.
Well, most of it's actually a love letter to the Queen, or the King, as it was of the day. Yeah. But aside from that, we are a Benthamite country, okay? The Constitution is quite clearly utilitarian in its aspect. But, having said that, you can clearly divide those conservatives who are constitutional conservatives, who feel that the gist of the Constitution is to protect the greater excesses of the government, between those who are traditionalists, who will basically argue that the High Court's already ruled on it and they've come out this way, and you know we want to get a plebiscite on this particular issue, because it's effectively
broadly speaking, you would think that the Liberal government of the day would fall on that constitutional conservative side as opposed to the traditional marriage side of things. Well, I don't know, back in the days of Howard, for example, they appointed self-described constitutional conservatives. Callanan, for example, who struck down work choices because it was a federal solution, or unsuccessfully tried to strike down work choices.
But they've always been a minority in the party. And I mean, there's loads of issues. Like, you can even take the GST. The GST, being federalized, is a good example of where a constitutional conservative would say, no, I don't support this idea. Right? But that was Howard's policy as he took it in. I think the best description for the Liberal Party is pragmatic conservatism. And it's to the extent that they will be conservative insofar as it'll get them elected. Right? And that's the extent of the conservatism they will practice.
Perhaps so. Which leaves us with the current issue of them expanding federal power to preserve themselves, basically, in power. And in this case, I guess they're... Yeah, go on.
It's $122 million that's being spent essentially on resolving a party room dispute. Right? This is a party room dispute, nothing more, nothing less. Right? I don't buy the argument that, hey, we took this to an election as a promise, because they've broken so many fucking promises so far.
Yeah.
This would just be another one. And it would also be one of the, like, to be perfectly honest, right, if you take a look at all the promises they've broken, this would be a tiny one. Like, it would affect maybe 10%, if not maybe 15% of their voting base, who will be like, oh, I'm going to not vote Liberal number one. Right? Now, that's not to say they're not going to preference Liberals over Labor. Right? They're just not going to put Liberals as number one. They might put CDP as number one. Now, that's not enough to get the CDP up on anywhere. Right? That's not enough to get...
like the All One Nation.
Well, I can understand the concern about One Nation, but that vote's already gone.
Really shift the balance.
I think all the One Nation votes have already gone. One Nation is saturated with the votes they will get.
But Australian Conservatives, not necessarily.
And I think...
I don't think so.
I mean, I think actually in some ways it's not so much about the voters. I think it's about Malcolm Turnbull's position as Prime Minister. So, yeah, that 15%... It may only be 15%, but I think that 15% probably has an outsized influence on cabinet, or in the party. And I think if Tony Abbott were to push Like, if he would have changed his mind and said, we're just going to have a free vote in Parliament, I think he'd be able to get away with it. But I don't think Malcolm Turnbull can, because of his, just the, they're already behind in news poll. Like, he's not exactly, really,
well, he's the preferred Prime Minister by a huge margin. He's not, like, the party's floundering, but Malcolm Turnbull versus Bill Shorten, there's a huge gap there.
Okay.
That may be true, but it doesn't win him an election.
Yeah.
Preferred Prime Minister polling does not win elections because...
Yep. And certainly preferred...
I'll wholly grant that. But at the same time, I also always say there's only one poll that matters, right?
Yeah.
All of that aside, the 15% I'm talking about is 15% of the Liberal primary vote. So that's 15% of that 38%, which I think works out to be about 4% of the population. So it's tiny. And that's what I'm saying.
Though, because that tiny proportion is the difference between the Conservatives or One Nation getting one Senate seat or perhaps two. That 4% could be the difference.
Nah, because that's okay. That's only double the Libertarian vote, right? If you're telling me that 4% is the difference,
4% plus for their pre-existing base, which is already at what? I mean, One Nation is getting close to 10% in some parts of the country. 14%, that's two quotas. That's 2 seats.
And when you're looking when you're looking at a, it's probably going to be like at least a hung parliament at best at the next federal election. So a few hundred votes in the wrong spot is the difference between winning government or not.
So the mistake you guys are making is you're thinking it's a national 4%. It's actually Okay, so it's going to basically be in New South Wales. It's going to be in Queensland. And it's going to be slightly in West Australia.
Yeah,
that's where this shift is.
New South Wales, that means they'll hold on to one Senate seat then, because they only got in with what? Yeah, that 4%, if it's concentrated in New South Wales, means the One Nation could hold on to their Senate seats.
Yes, so that's one. Yeah, that's why I'm saying it's not going to increase the number of One Nation support. Right.
But it could decrease it if what you're saying is true. Then One Nation, if they retain this policy, One Nation loses a Senate seat next election. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, in some ways, it's kind of.
They don't have that 4% support to get them up to 7.
Sure.
Can I just interrupt just to say, I think we can all agree that this is just $122 million being spent on a political problem. Like, whether it's a real political problem or not doesn't actually matter because they've spent the money. Like, it's kind of a moot point.
True.
So like maybe we just move on because
this is money blown away down the drain. It's a terrible shame, but this is what our politicians do every day.
Yeah, sure. I actually think it's probably it's the most obvious example of like blatant spending of money, and definitely it's probably on the higher side, but it's probably not the only example of just rank political nonsense spending a whole lot of money. I mean, I think the NBN is probably a much better example of just crass stupidity on a massive scale, and it no matter how much money that's going to be spent on that is just like absurd compared to what they're spending on the various websites. So I mean, I think it's just that this was like the spotlight was on them, and they completely screwed it up, like in blatant view of everybody who's watching.
Well, the other interesting thing has also been what question this has generated, and the questions really. So, I'm harking back to my visits here of the Australian Museum of Democracy. Sorry, the Democracy of Museum here in Canberra. The Museum of Australian Democracy here in Canberra, and they've got like this wonderful exhibit on all the referendums that have occurred in Australia. So we've only had a very small number of referendums that have passed. I think it was. Like it's single digits, if I recall correctly. So very few of them pass, and every single instance of them having passed, there's a sort of tradition there where they've typically taken the referendum question, allowed the yes vote the greatest amount of leeway to get to present their best case to try and get their referendum passed. Now, I know we've discussed that basically this is because the people who are passing the referendum are also the ones usually pushing the case for it.
They couldn't get it passed through Parliament in the first place.
Just as a side note, it's been 44 referendums since as of 2012, and only 8 have been carried. So there's been a lot more, but hardly any have actually made it.
Yeah. So and the reason why we never have like a retake of a referendum is because it's in this language that's given the greatest possible leeway to pass. If it fails, the question always becomes: so if you couldn't pass it on your best possible go, right? What chance do you have of passing it on a second go? And that's why we've never had to retake a referendum. Now, the problem with this plebiscite is it's clearly been written by people who want it to fail. And the result of that is wording that's very wishy-washy. So I think what they've opted for is, do you support same-sex marriage or something? Do you support same-sex couples getting married? And it's a yes or no question. Now that gives the no campaign the greatest possible challenge to it, because they can say, oh, you're also supporting PC culture and all of this other stuff. There's no this is specifically what you're voting for.
See, I disagree. I actually think, it's worth noting that Malcolm Turnbull was the leader of the Yes campaign for a Republic back in 1998 or 99 or whatever it was. So, it's not surprising that Malcolm Turnbull, who presumably had a say in how the question's phrased, might go on a more vague phrasing, because the ding against him in particular, and the Yes campaign in general, was that the question was too specific, and they got hammered
for the referendum.
Yeah, for the Republic. So people voted against, might have been in favour of, if they just said, "Do you support an Australian Republic?" People would say vote yes, but because they put a specific model as the question, it got knocked back. So I think selling. Because if you, one of the issues in having something specific is they don't have a plan for something specific, because if they'd had something specific, they would have done it by now, or at least they would have been before Parliament. We've already had maybe half a dozen different variations on what can be done.
The thing is that something specific is something contentious.
Yeah.
Okay? And if you leave it open-ended, then you leave room for wiggle room about exactly what reform or compromise is going to be achieved in the Liberal Party room and subsequently in Parliament about what exactly the same-sex marriage legislation is going to be. Now, obviously, leaving it open-ended is also contentious, because it means that the Conservatives are now going to say vote no, because there are no guarantees of freedom of association or freedom of expression in the legislation. And those are valid concerns, or rather, there is no legislation, but that's what those are valid concerns really for. The response, I suppose, is that even if there are none, nothing would change, because the anti-discrimination legislation in this country already applies to gay couples. Gay couples can already go through the ceremony of marriage. They can't get a marriage certificate, but they can go through the ceremony. And if your hypothetical gay baker refuses to bake them a cake, well, if they refuse to do that for the ceremony, then they're already infringing on the same anti-discrimination legislation they would be, even if gay couples got a certificate at the end of it from the government saying they're married. So I guess, those are the problems with the debate as that they stand. But I guess there's a fair point to be had that, even if that's in anti-discrimination law as it is, there should be a push to change that law to allow people to freely associate.
That's the LDP plan.
Yeah.
They want to. So David Leyonhjelm's policy on this is he wants to amend both the Sex Discrimination Act, the is it the Sex Discrimination Act?
It's the Sex Discrimination Act of 1984. Yes, it is. That's the motivating. The Racial Discrimination Act is not, I don't think, an aspect of this.
It's the Sex Discrimination Act. It's the Sex Discrimination Act. So he wants to amend the Sex Discrimination Act to allow effectively people to not bake a cake, Christian, whatever that example, as well as allow civil celebrants to not perform the ceremony if they don't feel it appropriate, and also the religious exemptions in the Act. So you can do all of that. It's not these are side issues. You can negotiate that in the party room. And I would actually say right now, considering Bill Shorten has said that he's going to go in for gay marriage, taking it into the next election, and if they win, they will implement gay marriage. If you are of the persuasion that you believe religious exemptions should be a thing, you kind of need to vote yes. And that's because you're going to lose either way, right? If Bill Shorten gets in, right? It's pretty much a heads I win, tails you lose situation. The No campaign, presuming Bill Shorten wins and there's no change in the polls for the Liberals, same-sex marriage is going to be here by 2020.
Yep.
And I also add, if same-sex marriage passes, marriage will be more inconvenient for gay couples than it was before if they go through marriage certification. Okay? Marriage in this country is bureaucracy on bureaucracy. Okay? You want to separate and get divorced? $800 filing fee. You may need to turn up to a hearing. You may need to explain to a judge that your kids are well cared for. You need to wait 12 months, a year to get divorced. A year of separation. Okay? On top of that, your assets are going to be divvied up by the court unless you've come to some prior agreement with your partner. And they're going to be divvied up according to notions of fairness and equity and justice, and it's a bit of a lawyer's picnic. Hello, I'm a lawyer. I practice in family law. But really, in all seriousness, it's a lot of money gone when emotional couples disagree, a tragic situation, and it should be recognised that the family law system in this country, which same-sex marriage advocates want more people involved in, apparently, is actually not that great. It's a bit of a disaster.
Presumably, though, de facto couples go through the same process, though. Like, de facto couples with kids and property and the rest of it.
Yep.
So
it's worse. It's worse. But
it's even more uncertain for de facto couples because the judge even has to decide if there's a de facto relationship, which makes the litigation even more uncertain and therefore more risky, more costly, etc.
Yeah.
So can I just say I'm glad that I'm the only one in this conversation that is not married.
No, look, in all seriousness, that's no reason not to get into a relationship, but we just have to...
You said anything about a relationship, I said not married.
Yeah. De facto or married, whatever. The point is, these are very costly parts of our legal system. Ideally, there would be access to very low-cost prenups. Right now, prenups are perhaps a little...
Illegal?
Pardon?
Mostly.
No,
are
they're
illegal,
legal.
mostly.
Can have them, but they're you need lawyers involved, so it's at least $3,000 each way, I would think, for each side, and it's pretty expensive, and you would think that you could just do 50-50. I keep what I brought in, you keep what you brought in, 50-50 each way. Let's move on. 50-50 each way on whatever we buy in future. Let's move on. You would think that you could have a simple thing like that, but unfortunately, it wouldn't be recognised under our system because you need lawyers. You need them involved. You need them to sign off on everything. You need my cat to get in the way of this podcast. Anyway, so
I feel, Zeev, like you've almost written an article about this somewhere. Is there somewhere they could read more about your thoughts on prenuptial agreements on the internet?
Yes. I encourage people to go through prenups if they're going through this thing because it will save them a lot of time and hassle down the track. Yeah.
And he's got an article in The Spectator Australia. That was what I was leading towards.
On The Spectator Australia, I have a guest post there about exactly this issue and how tragic and emotional these cases can be. Anyway.
And actually, while we're doing self-plugging, in the last 5 minutes... Oh, just before we just switch, I've also got an article at The Spectator on same-sex marriage on when Christians should vote yes. So if you want to hear like a religious argument from a Christian perspective on why you should vote yes, go to Spectator Australia. We've both got articles up there. In fact, Zeev was the one who hooked me up.
Yep. By the way, I'm kind of either way abstaining/leaning yes. So I really don't mind.
I'm actually going to be voting no, based on the
you
fact that someone
beers?
took me up on my offer.
Oh, did they?
They're delivering me a slab of Cooper's Pale Ales, I believe. So I'll be voting no based on the fact that I've been bribed.
I'm principled, I tell you. Well, actually, I guess you are probably principled. Just mercenary principles. All right, let's talk about let's talk about unprincipled. Let's talk about the Liberal Party in New South Wales buying up a coal power station. So there's the Liddell power station that's basically on the process of being decommissioned, and yet this is what the Liberal government over there thinks is a perfect opportunity to buy. So they're going to attempting to try and buy the Liddell coal power station. Basically, because of their own stupid rules. So, Vikas, you're the power generation guy here. Fill us in with the juicy details.
Yeah. So this is fantastic. So anyone who doesn't know about Liddell's a coal-fired power station. I think it was opened up in the 60s, if I recall correctly. It's a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But the point is, right now, its main purpose is basically to act as a Kickstarter to another coal power plant. So the issue is, after it gets decommissioned in 2021, there's a high likelihood that if there's a blackout or brownout situation, that the power, because these are thermal pit coal generation. So like when you shut them down, they still keep generating electricity for a couple of days. But similarly, to start them back up, because of the thermal pit, you've got to basically heat them up over a couple of days to get started. So that being the case, they've recognized that if there's basically brownout, blackout situation, they need this power station potentially to kickstart another power station and to basically get the whole ball rolling for all of New South Wales's power needs. So it's a serious risk. Now, for anyone who's out there going, well, why can't we just use green power to do that? The simple answer to that is intermittency. We need the power to be able to maintain a certain level for a certain period of time in order to kickstart these thermal base stations. There's a lot of explanation I could go into, which
constant, for example.
Yeah.
So varies with the wind, so you can't provide that constant level of power.
Correct, and neither can solar. So
because the sun is sometimes blocked, or it's nighttime.
Correct. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of issues related to that. I mean, what would be good is if we had like a geothermal or potentially a hydroelectric solution. Like those would work fantastically to solve this little problem New South Wales has. Unfortunately, the mountains aren't exactly high enough for a hydro solution that'll work there, and we don't exactly have access to geothermal vents. Yeah. So in terms of renewable power that would fix this potential issue, New South Wales doesn't have any options. But coal's there and it's cheap, and natural gas is there, but natural gas, due to the price of natural gas spiking right now, isn't really a financially viable solution. So coal is probably the most viable solution for at least, I don't know, ongoing. I can't think of anything.
And they've also
immediately
banned,
surely with natural gas.
Also, they've banned coal. They've banned gas exploration, or what is it? Fracking-based gas exploration in New South Wales.
And that's what's pushed the natural gas price up.
Yeah, which means that the natural gas prices go up because supply will over time decrease without new sources of natural gas. But anyway, yes.
But surely, I mean, like, natural gas is like the price is less of an issue when you've got a brownout situation and you've got to shut down the power plant. Like, I mean, if you're only using it to literally kickstart another power plant, surely gas is a good option because it can just be turned on. Like, it's not required.
Sure,
from what I understand, it's really, you can use it in an intermittent fashion.
Sure. That's actually a lot of. Here's the thing, though. I think what they're opting for is like a full-time power plant, so that it's not just to kickstart something.
Right. Okay.
Because that's a lot of capital to invest on a power plant that's effectively just a kickstart motor.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So
I need it running to really get some investment. Okay.
Well, yeah. So it's effectively. I think the fact.
Then why should the government purchase it? I mean, surely if it's a profitable plant, why is the government getting involved? Shouldn't it be offloaded to some other provider that will refurbish the plant and make it ready for use in future? So shouldn't we set our mind to that question?
So the nonsensical reason that's been given by, I think, the New South Wales Energy Minister, I can't remember, it was someone from the New South Wales government, is that the regulations basically stop them from building another coal plant. So it's far easier for them to just buy it off the private provider they sold it to than to build a new one. Now, if it were me running the show, I would just deregulate. But I mean, clearly, there's a whole bunch of political things in play that I don't have any control over.
That's true enough, but it's still worth pointing out that this is a mess brought about because the government has made it unviable for Australia's power supply to expand in an affordable way with coal or gas. So their response is to basically use taxpayer money to save a power plant that will provide somewhat affordable power compared to renewables, but still on taxpayer subsidies, so it'll be less affordable than it was before. This is a really amazing situation because we have a Liberal government that can't even tell people, guys, your power bills are going up because of renewables. Your power bills are going up and you need to vote for us so that we can cut your power prices. I mean, this is a Liberal case for addressing poverty and inequality and social justice in a nutshell.
It's also the legacy of the Liberal Party because it was John Howard who brought in from what I understand, the renewable energy target. So, it's
the initial one. It's much lower in fairness, but still it brought up power prices.
But I mean, the principle was established.
Yes, they waved white flag of surrender and decided to bring it in, and unfortunately, it's been expanded as a scheme ever since. More money is poured into renewables. More restrictions have been implemented on the expansion of coal and gas supply, and prices have gone up. And that's the tragic thing, that we can't even make the case that if you restrict supply and demand goes up, prices go up.
Surprise, yeah.
We can't make this basic case to the public and win it. I think it's the most obvious case you can make in some ways. But of course, the objection is that climate change is happening and that we need to do away with affordable power, or rather replace it with renewable power, which will someday become affordable, in order to address the issue. So I think that objection is one that, I mean, it's worth considering, but I don't know if we have time to consider it today. Do we?
Yeah. See, maybe. See, the big problem is, so New South Wales is the only state in Australia which can quite definitively say they never had a private company. So that electricity was provided by the state from the beginning, right? In Victoria, there was a company that started up for a while before it got nationalised. I can't remember its name. You'd have to look it up.
Yep.
But it was basically a subsidiary of General Electric in the United States. Yep. But New South Wales had the I'll have to look it up.
I don't know.
It was in 1880 something. It was an electricity bill. But basically, as an act of Parliament of New South Wales, they determined electricity will be a thing in New South Wales. And Tamworth was the first city that they actually did up electricity. Like entirely. Like they had electricity rolling out very slowly in Sydney, but Tamworth was the one that first got fully electric for street lighting. And then slowly they rolled it out in Sydney. But the point is, like, New South Wales just has a very bad history when it comes to electricity. Not bad history, but like very government-oriented history. For a while...
So bad history.
Bad history, yeah. So for a while, it was run even through the the post office. So the Postmaster General of New South Wales was also the head of the electricity board. So, like, you can sort of understand the historical context of why, like, it's very hard for New South Wales to ever envision private providers of electricity just because it's never been a thing.
But then again, as I think I read recently in The Australian, there's a great article by Judith Sloan there setting out the fact that, for example, Queensland has had, or continues to have, a fully publicly owned electricity network, and yet its electricity network has some of the highest prices in the country. So it's worth noting that government involvement does not in some way suggest that electricity prices are going to be low, unless they're subsidised.
Yeah, but it's not greedy big corporations ripping off poor innocent grandmas when the government does it. Come on, Zeev, what kind of heartless, terrible person are you to suggest that these big, greedy fat cats can't come in and make money for the misery of freezing grandpa? I mean, really.
So,
all right, final thoughts, Vikas.
I think that to the counterpoint of that, the one the NTEU, sorry, not the NTEU, sorry, the Electrical Trade Union, ETU, the one that the ETU and the Labor Party continuously bring up is that South Australia has completely privatised grid. So it's got a privatised grid and privatised generation. But it has some of the highest prices in the country. And the reason for that is not because it was privatised, it's because it's privatised and regulated in a certain way. It was regulated in a certain way that they would only raise prices by a certain percentage every year. So to get that deal, they had to jack up the rates to a phenomenal rate, right? So that it's sub-CPI increases in electricity pricing. So that's why it suddenly spiked up. The other thing is, as far as I can tell, and this is based on just looking at the renewable energy target from the outside, I'm sure if I was actually working in the national energy market, I'd have a bigger idea of this. It seems to me the only two places that take the renewable energy target very seriously are the ACT, who will be soon at 100% renewable, I think by 2024 or something like that, and South Australia. Now, the fuck-ups in the grid here in the ACT are made up for by the fact that we have New South Wales to rely on.
Exactly.
And
what's the population of Canberra as well?
About 400,000.
Exactly,
so, yeah. For the moment, all of the fuck-ups of the ACT's green fetish are basically covered up by the fact that we're getting nice coal energy coming over from New South Wales.
Yep.
Now, South Australia doesn't have the benefit of that, and that's why you see things like rolling blackouts during summer. So,
their warning might happen in Victoria too now.
Yeah,
great news, because apparently Victoria.
Thanks, Dan Andrews.
Regulations, yes.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and I'm actually getting really annoyed by this because every green sort of like renewable advocate I see has started touting the thing that intermittency doesn't matter. Like it's a thing that's made up by people who are obsessed with, coal power.
What?
Intermittency is yeah, I know, I get really bugged by this. So intermittency is the actual reason for why these blackouts and everything occur.
Yeah.
Is because despite the fact that what intermittency means is I built a 20 kilowatt solar station, but it's not delivering 20 kilowatts right now because 20 kilowatts of sunlight isn't on it.
Yeah.
Right? That's what intermittency means. Right? If I build a 20 kilowatt station, I'm picking small numbers for a reason. If I build a 20 kilowatt coal station, it will deliver 20 kilowatts of coal until I turn it off.
Yeah.
Right? That's what I'm talking about. And that's the reason why you get loads of blackouts, because we're still building these solar grids and these wind grids, these renewable grids, in the same way as we would build a coal grid without the assumption that, under the assumption that we get a nice curve, and that's just not the case with renewable, and that's why we have these shortages of power.
Yep, that's
something
Thanks,
to
Kevin.
look forward to.
Yeah.
We'll get private generators. Righto.
All right. So that's it for this week's episode. Make sure you can, if you love the show, share us, like, share, and subscribe. All the rest of that. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. You can get us there. And we'll be back in next week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.